Hello there. Now, amongst humanity, for very good reasons, genetic augmentation has been banned. Ever since the late 20th century, when a bunch of genetically engineered superhumans went around and tried to take over the world, the human race has thought maybe genetic manipulation not such a good idea. But not all humans. Some humans thought it was a wonderful idea. Today, we're going to discuss one of the most influential and intelligent geneticists the human race has ever produced. A man whose vision and clarity of what he wanted to accomplish was second to none. His genetic research was so advanced for its time, it would still be being researched and based on by the 24th century. That man was Arik Soong, another member of the genius-level intellect society known as the Soong family. Before we get started, like, share, subscribe, and comment down below, and hit the bell notification icon if you do like this video and the other videos in this playlist and on this channel. With that out of the way, let's get into the story of Arik Soong. Arik Soong was a human geneticist who was a proponent of technologies that would allow humans to genetically manipulate their own DNA to produce superhumans. He believed that the flaw with the augments created in the 20th century was not just a genetic one. It was not the super ego versus the super intelligence problem. He believed that pure and simple, the human factor and the mismanagement of the augments was the problem. That humans are inherently flawed, yes, but they're also not inherently evil, and he was convinced that yes, for every Khan which could potentially be created, there would probably still be 1,000, if not 1,000,000, if not more, perfectly reasonable, rational human beings. They just happen to be augments. Technically, an augment is not a Homo sapien in the same way that other members of the human race are. Although still human, they're something else. Human, but a little bit more. Their modifications make them as different from a human as, say, a Romulan is from a Vulcan. Still technically very similar, but subtly different. With genetic modifications, which would result in muscular and intellectual enhancements in particular. Now, he was convinced that the destiny of the human race was genetic manipulation and genetic enhancement. Of course, though, these were unpopular views in his particular chosen field, as this was highly illegal research. But, nonetheless, he would decide to pursue such a dangerous and controversial line of research. He would become the head medical officer at Cold Station 12, where humanity had sort of stored 1,800 augment embryos, which were holdovers from the eugenics wars, that basically, for reasons of no one knew what to do with them, for ethical reasons. Should they just destroy them? After all, they're human, they're innocent, but they are augments, and if they're ever gestated, they could be dangerous. But the debate had raged on by this point for pretty much 200 years as to what exactly to do with them. But being augments, they were still in pretty damn decent condition. He took a few of them, stole them, and disappeared off into deep space to raise them as his children. On his little ship, he would take them to the planet of Trialis 4. He would trade with the Orions, developing a relationship with the Syndicate in order to supply himself with the materials needed to raise his children, as he would call them. They would come to know him as father. His objective was to raise them ethically with a human conscience, not to be taught that they are superior and better than other humans, but merely another step in the evolutionary ladder. Unfortunately, in 2144, he would be captured, tried and imprisoned, separating him from his children. Though being augments with their enhanced physical and mental abilities, they would survive to become adults. He believed that perhaps they would have died, but he was wrong. Those same augments would go on to murder the crew of a Klingon bird of prey and steal the ship, forcing Starfleet, once they learned what had happened, to go after them in order to maintain peace with the Klingons. When Captain Archer of the Enterprise NX-01 went to see him at his detention center, he learned that he was still doing his research, by now just writing it down on pieces of paper which were plastered all over the walls of his cell. Periodically, though, the guards would take this research away and burn it, as again, this research is not permitted. He had made several groundbreaking breakthroughs, including modifying a T cell to basically to remove disease. But all of his research was continually, as I say, burned because this kind of modification was highly illegal and what got him put there in the first place. He wasn't allowed to use any digital recording equipment because he notes that although he'd made several escape attempts, one of his more successful ones was the modification of a pad that he used to unlock all the doors in the prison, escape, and he actually got pretty far before being recaptured. FYI, this wasn't going to be his last escape attempt, even in this encounter. He would agree, once he learned that his children were still alive, to help Starfleet go after them and find them, if only to try and protect them and stop them being killed or from committing any further crimes, and to be reunited with them. Obviously, his ultimate goal was to escape. While en route, however, the Enterprise was attacked by the Orions. Several members of the crew, including T'Pol, were abducted and spirited away by the Orions to take to their slave markets on Verax 3. He would help Starfleet infiltrate this place using an old code that he had, which basically you only went there willingly if you were buyers and knew what you were doing kind of place. Otherwise you end up as a slave yourself. He would actually help liberate the slaves and free many others, but part of this was a cover so that he could escape himself. But he did a bit of good in the meantime. He helped recover the crew of the Enterprise as well as free a load of the other slaves. Now, at this point, the Augments would come after them as well, and they would help to free Soong from custody aboard the Enterprise. At this point, now reunited with his children aboard the stolen bird of prey, Enterprise now had a double problem. It now needed to not only round up the Augments, but it also needed to round up Soong. With his children, they would proceed to go to Cold Station 12 to get the other 1800 embryos. But Soong didn't want his children to be violent. He was already a little suspicious, butting heads with Malik, wondering what had happened to some of the others, and they lied to him, and he probably knew that. But nonetheless, he gives the order, as their father, as their new captain, do not kill anyone. Board the station, get the embryos, and leave. But they needed equipment and they needed to access the embryos that were obviously locked away. Malik, the leader of the Augments, would kill one of the people at the station in order to coerce the others to give them access to the embryos. This was something that shocked Soong, who simply didn't want his children to be perceived as murderous psychopaths just like the Augments of the 20th century, but that's what they were kind of shaping up to be like. This furthered the rift between himself and Malik, as he kept telling Malik that they had to be better, not worse than the worst aspects of humanity. Killing was wrong. Malik didn't understand this. He thought the application of strength just required a little bit of violence. He simply didn't care whether that incurred death or not. And Soong did. But it was quite clear that some of the other Augments, particularly Persis, actually agreed more with Soong, seeing Malik as something of an out-of-control loose cannon. But, nonetheless, they carried on as normal, going away together. But then Malik would learn that Soong was planning to make further genetic modifications to the embryos, this time reducing their aggression factor to make them more like, in personality, a normal human, and therefore an increased chance that despite all of their gifts, their genetic enhancements, their enhanced strength, cardiovascular, hand-eye coordination, intelligence, stamina, everything, despite all of these gifts they would receive from their genetic modifications, they wouldn't come with a super ego, or at least stood less of a chance of coming with it as an inherent flaw in their genetic makeup to allow them to live a more normal, peaceful life. Malik objected to this, believing that Augments were what they were. They were the perfect expression of humanity. They were an enhancement. He didn't see his aggression and murder as a problem, even though he killed other Augments. But this is no real different to a human killing other humans. It just happens that Malik was an Augment, and as it had been determined many years earlier, by creating humans that were better than other humans, you made them believe they were better. They had less motivation to be good. They were more indifferent to those who were not considered to be their equals. It's not a fair assessment, it's not a kind one, but it's the simple, cold reality of the situation. Malik didn't want to make weaker Augments. He wanted the next generation of Augments to be just like him and the others. So he removed Soong from command, put him in his quarters, and then decided that he was going to use other bioagents that they'd stolen from Cold Station 12 to modify several torpedoes into biogenetic weapons that would then be fired at a Klingon colony to start a war between humanity and the Klingons, allowing them free rein to escape into the Briar Patch, as Soong called it. Incidentally, the name that he gave it would echo down the centuries, and it would still be known as the Briar Patch by Starfleet 200 years later and probably beyond. Side note. Now, Soong found out about this. Persis helped him escape. He went into an escape pod, which is interesting that a Klingon bird of prey even had an escape pod, but you learn something every day. Klingons have escape pods now. He gets off the ship and he reunites with the Enterprise with the full intention of stopping his children, because he doesn't want them to commit mass murder. He doesn't want them to become the very thing that humans, that the rest of humanity, that Starfleet believes that augments are. He believes they can be better, and Persis is actually a demonstration of an augment that was better than the others. She wasn't a killer. She didn't want to be this way. She saw the mistakes. Unfortunately, she didn't escape the ship with him. She stayed on board and would ultimately be killed with the other augments when the bird of prey was destroyed by the Enterprise. After this, he would be returned to incarceration, but he would now be told that the guards would no longer burn his research, if they'd actually been burning it at all and not just storing it for Section 31 or something. Now they were going to allow him to do his research, and they were going to store it in the hopes that one day the human race would be more enlightened and that future work could be done based on his research that could lead to perhaps medical breakthroughs that would genuinely benefit the human race and not create a load of super soldiers that would be hell-bent on conquering it. Now, at this point, he had, because of experiences with Malik, kind of given up on his dream of creating superhumans. He believed that the human element was perhaps the problem, and would switch his field of research away from genetics to cybernetics. The first baby steps to what would ultimately lead his descendants, of which he must have, although we don't know specifically, they're never referenced, so he must have had them before, because I doubt he managed to have them while in prison, unless he got released later. He must have had children that went on to become the great Dr. Noonien Soong in the 24th century. Simple fact is they are related, unless he's actually a distant uncle, not ancestor. Again, it's not entirely clear, but it does appear that Arik Soong was a direct ancestor of Noonien, not just another member of the family, but it is entirely plausible that that is what happened, that he was a cousin or the brother of whoever actually was the ancestor. Just to be clear, there isn't any hard evidence one way or the other, although it does indicate that he's the direct ancestor of Noonien. Now, he switched his area of specialty and began work on what would again be the early steps of advanced cybernetics and artificial life, because you could basically program it to be good data, although lore is an example of how that can go wrong as well. A little bit later that year, the Klingons would actually attempt to break Soong out of prison because his work on genetics was exemplary, and in case you weren't aware of this, the Klingons actually managed to salvage several of the augment embryos from the bird of prey, because that's how sturdy augments are. And the Klingons had used the genetics to create bioengineered, genetically augmented Klingons. And those Klingons were mad. It also had become a virus, because the Klingons were not as good with this kind of technology as humans. They wanted Soong to help them cure it, but unfortunately we learned that, from the Klingons anyway, point of view, Soong was too heavily guarded for them to extract, and they had to abduct Dr. Phlox because he'd worked with him, and Phlox was a little bit more accessible as he was aboard the Enterprise, not in a highly guarded detention center on Earth itself. And there we have it. Arik Soong, head of medical research at Cold Station 12 during the 2130s, and would ultimately be removed from his post because, he stole a load of basically living weapons, activated them, hid them away, and yeah, not a good decision there soon. But nonetheless, he's another example of a demonstration of the profound intellect and ability of the Soong family. And this is going to be part of a full series breaking down and discussing every member of said family. But with that, we are now at the end of this video. Please like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell notification if you enjoyed this one. Go back and see the other videos in the series. If the others are out now, watch them, because they might be. I don't know when you're watching this. And of course, on my channel there is a full playlist, multiple playlists actually, of different Star Trek themed series. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.